Welcome back to the One Question Leadership Podcast. I'm Glenn Caruso, head football coach at the University of St. Thomas, and so happy you tuned in. You know, quite often we get so caught up in the daily grind of work or coaching or recruiting that we don't often take time to reflect. I would encourage everybody to take just a few minutes each day to try and see the bigger picture, to stop and realize that in the end, we're going to be judged on what we choose to believe, who we choose to love, and what we decide to leave behind in the hearts and minds of not just our players, not just our coworkers, but also our children. And remember, if we're doing it right, we're coaching football for life.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at OneQLeadership. A quick note before we begin, this episode was recorded before the current pandemic chapter of global history, so please listen with that context in mind. Our guests today are Jill Bodensteiner. Jill is the Director of Athletics at St. Joseph University, and Dr. Eric Laudano, who is the Senior Associate Athletics Director for High Performance, also there at St. Joseph University. Greetings, Jill. Greetings, Eric. Thanks for joining us here on the podcast.
Thanks for having us, Ty. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Ty.
No problem. Jill, you brought Eric on in this position, Senior Associate Athletics Director for High Performance, last July 2019. I wonder about that position and if it was a part of your original vision for the department. And what I understand about the position is it's over like strength and conditioning, mental health and well-being of the student athletes, and all things related to the well-being of student athletes. Talk to me a little bit about how that fit into your vision when you took over a little over a year and a half ago there at St. Joseph's University.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question, Ty. I mean, obviously, having strength and conditioning and sports medicine and mental health resources is not necessarily innovative in and of itself. I think the key from my perspective was the integration of everything, really a holistic approach to the well-being of our student athletes. And so, you mentioned, so the obvious sports medicine, in addition to our certified athletic trainers, we've got our team physicians and our specialist physicians, strength and conditioning. I would say sort of a umbrella over all that is sports science and some data analytics associated therewith. You've got nutrition, you've got mental health, and then, a really critical piece of all this is the student athlete medical insurance piece of it, and then everything else that goes along with being a healthcare administrator. So again, most Division I athletic departments have those functions. To me, it was taking the opportunity of a reorganization department-wide to really see how we could best integrate those to make sure there were absolutely no silos. And, beyond no silos, which should be like the baseline, are all of those activities interacting and integrated on a daily basis, and how best to do that. So that's how I sort of approached the reorganization, and then ultimately the hiring of Eric was through that lens of wanting a holistic and integrated approach.
Right, which is very important. Eric, I mentioned earlier you did that experts roundtable with us over at Athletic Director U, and that had to be a year and a half ago itself. How have you seen this type of position evolve? As mentioned, you were in a similar position in your last two stops in college athletics. Talk to me about how you've seen it evolve in the industry, this one person who is making sure everybody's on the same page in terms of health and well-being of student athletes.
Yeah, I think, as you stated, two previous stops, I was in similar roles at the same level. And I think when I started in this role, a few years back, there wasn't a lot of these positions that were part of a senior cabinet in a collegiate athletics department. And I think how I've seen it evolve is the investment in this position and the personnel that are hired into the position, but also a greater investment in student athlete holistic development and healthcare. And I think it's becoming more and more popular, really for the student athlete's benefit at the end of the day. To have one position and one area content expert to align all of healthcare professionals for one common goal, to create a network around the student athletes so that they get the optimal healthcare that they need during their 4 years as a collegiate student athlete. And so there have been a lot of college athletics departments who have added this. in probably the past 2 to 3 years. I saw a big uptick this past year in newly created positions. And I firmly believe that it's a needed and necessary position. And I think it's the right thing to do by the student athlete's sake.
Right. I agree with that. Now, what I've seen, Jill, specifically to you, a lot of the positions, people are new to that position, right? They are now in a executive or senior level position, and now they're the key contact for all those various things, so they're not siloed. What you've done, Jill, is you brought over somebody who already had experience on it. I guess that obviously made it attractive to you to bring Eric on after you decided what you want to do with the position.
Yeah, Ty, that's exactly right. So I think, when I looked at the applicant pool, I had a lot of athletic trainers, a lot of strength and conditioning coaches, a couple mental health providers. And I had just a few people, and I would say those people, in addition to Eric, had some sort of Olympic related experience and some sort of professional experience, because I think it's safe to say that both of those entities and the highest level caliber of athletes are a little bit ahead of some colleges and universities. So, in addition to the fact that Eric had already sort of gone through that integration exercise, which is, I think, part strategy, part culture, part knowledge. I think, he'd been through it at 2 institutions. The other thing that was just absolutely fantastic, well, so many things fantastic about Eric, but that he was from here and he understood. I mean, this is a complex and really good medical market in Philadelphia, far different in many ways just by volume alone where I came from. And so having an expert who understood the landscape and, when you talk about maybe getting discounts at surgery centers, he knows exactly where those are and who to call. And when you need a specialist referral on a certain issue, he knows that market. So all of those things put together, and then just our interpersonal sort of, we clicked when we've met and when we interviewed. That's what really made me excited. I mean, it was sort of a no-brainer for me to bring Eric on the team.
All right. The last thing is of the utmost importance, right? Make sure you guys work well together. Eric, tell me about what attracted you to apply for this position there at St. Joseph's University.
There was a lot that was attractive to me. I think, Jill noted the ecosystem and the advanced medical care that's in the Philadelphia region. And having worked in this region since 2008, I think I have a pretty good pulse on what Jill stated in terms of best options for our student athlete healthcare while working with our team physicians. But aside from that, there was a lot about St. Joseph's University that was really intriguing to me. Academically, it aligned with a place that I wanted to be. It was an opportunity to build something from scratch, and I'm a builder. I love doing that, and I love the challenge of building a team of like-minded professionals. So that opportunity was there. I think, the opportunity to stay within the region for personal reasons, for family reasons, was enticing to me. And as Jill stated, when we first met, we hit it off. And there's an intuitive portion to me when I look at places where I want to work and where I want to lead a program. And I also look at the folks that are currently here. And I knew that there were great professionals here in these healthcare professions here at St. Joseph's, and the team physicians that were present, and the campus support. So there was a lot that aligned for me. But I'm also a learner, right? And so I think, some people will say, well, I've been in this position for a number of years and was at the forefront a number of years ago. I never stopped learning. And so, I have the growth mindset, and I want to learn from Jill. And I had some great athletic directors that I've worked with, and this was another opportunity for me to learn outside of my area content expert as well.
All right, which is excellent, right? Location, the resources were available in the location. Looked at and studied the values of the leadership there at the school, and also the resource in terms of academics, in terms of what the athletics department, how it fits into the academics, and then knowing that it's a constant growth process. I think that's excellent. Jill, you mentioned applicants, and this is a question for both of you. Is it necessary for the person holding this type of position to be a licensed or credentialed practitioner, either athletic trainer, strength coach, medical professional? Is that a necessity for this type of position? Because most of them on the campuses we see, there are former athletic trainers, former I don't even know if you say former, right? Athletic trainers, strength and conditioning coaches, people who have some type of license or some type of credential in terms of profession and what they do, or even doctors, right? So was that necessary for you, Jill? And Eric, do you think is necessary for the position as it expands across the industry?
I'll take it first, and then I can defer to Jill on her portion. But for me, from working in this profession for so long, my background is certified athletic trainer. And I do believe it's important that when this position is created and someone is hired, that they have an area content expert credential and certification in their area of expertise. But I also know and understand that I don't know everything about the areas that I oversee. And so the people that I oversee are my thought partners, and I want to learn from them. And I've learned tremendous amount about sports psychology, sports nutrition, strength and conditioning from those folks that I have hired in the past or have overseen. And so I think it's really important to look at your strategy and who you hire and why you're hiring that person and what value they bring from their area content expert, but also what are their leadership skills to lead from a strategy perspective, and how do they build relationships and how do they manage their personnel. I think there's no one specific area in the holistic development of a student athlete that, quote, should be overseeing this area. I truly believe it should align with what the athletics department feels is the right fit, the right person, and what the priorities are.
And I think I would add to that what stage of development the department's in now that Eric is going to build it over the next few years. I might think differently, but I will tell you right now, I am violating my normal rule of thumb when it comes to this answer, because my rule of thumb is give me a smart person and they'll figure it out. I am now a convert to the notion that the person overseeing integrated performance should have a performance background. And I agree with Eric that I think the exact type of background could vary. And I met some really interesting candidates who had different backgrounds. But at the end of the day, I do now believe it's really critical to have someone with ATC or strength and conditioning or a general performance background lead this division. And I can't tell you the weight that it takes off my shoulders, knowing I have an expert and not like a Jill trying to learn all this. And just to have Eric sit on our executive team, sit on the sport admin team, the sport administrator team. He at this leadership level, he brings his own personal knowledge, not just his knowledge of the unit. So this is one of the few areas that I'm going to say, at least in the near future, I mean, I won't let Eric go anywhere, but if he were, I would go right back into the well and find somebody who grew up in this part of it. I just think it's too important to try and have someone who's never been in it learn it.
I wonder, I guess you were in a position for a year before you hired Eric on.
Yeah.
And then you hire him on, and now he's been on for a little over 6 months. When you think back to the year without him, do you feel like there was a voice missing in terms of all the aspects that Eric covers and how he advises you about all those aspects? When you think back to, or even like say 20 years from now, you become the athletics director at Notre Dame, right? Do you feel like that is a necessary position in all athletics departments, I guess is where I'm trying to go with it.
Man, if they hire me as a 70-year-old, I'll be in business. But, yeah, I that's a tough one because I in some ways, I'm a forward-looking person. I'm not spending much time thinking about where we were. I can tell you the strides we've made this year since July are pretty incredible. I mean, you look at mental health alone. We were the first institution. We had a donor provide the Calm app to every single student athlete. Eric and some great student athletes founded Hawks Minded, a mental health peer support group. We have our first ever sports psychologist, started a couple weeks ago. We just installed Sparta Science, which I think makes us among the certainly A10 conference leaders in injury prevention and rehabilitation. Just the constant in-service and education and integration of our personnel that Eric oversees, our response to crisis situations. I mean, it's all been at such a high level that, there is part of me that says, what did we do without Eric or someone with his background? But I'm just really thankful to have him here now, and I think we're doing a great job. And most importantly, our student athletes are appreciating it. I mean, the notes that we both get from them, fell asleep to the call map last night. You're the best. Had my first appointment with the sports psych. Can't wait to try out Sparta Science. I mean, they're seeing it. They're feeling it. They know that we are investing in their well-being, and it's awesome.
Right, which is excellent. Eric, I wonder, Jill mentioned you guys just hired a sports psychologist. I recently had a psychologist on who was part of an athletics department, and she had to educate me on the difference between a sports psychologist and a clinical psychologist who works in a sports environment. And they actually do two different things. So I wonder, there on campus, do you guys have a clinical psychologist, or maybe does campus have counseling services that are available to student athletes that can work with the sports psychologist when it talks about performance and mental performance? And is there a way do you have that type of collaboration on campus? Or tell me a little bit about that aspect when it comes to psychology and psychologists on campus.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And that goes back to my point earlier where, the area content experts I oversee are my thought partners, and I learn from them. And the difference between a clinical psychologist who is involved in sports psychology and a sports psychologist is something I had to learn when I was doing a national search at another institution. And so the way I lead and the expectations that I have when I integrate a position within athletics that's also part of a campus department is alignment, right? And so we have an incredible counseling and psychological services department here at St. Joseph's, and we have leaders in that department that understand and know the additional stressors that student athletes have. And one of my first meetings when I got here was with our director of CAPS, and he is all on board with taking care of our student athletes, continuing the resources for our student athletes, understanding what they need, but also in support of bringing in our own sports psychologists for our student athletes, because the data has been built prior to my arrival that there's a need. And so one of my first strategic moves when I was looking to hire a sports psychologist for us was to ensure that the sports psychologist that was hired and our director of CAPS and his staff were aligned before the start date. And so they had met, and we got in a room and we talked about how CAPS policies and procedures are still going to be in place and still going to be aligned. And, we talked about emergency action plans for mental health. We talked about urgent needs. We talked about phone numbers to campus safety, everything that we need to integrate so that this sports psychologist is basically an extension of that division, but is housed within athletics, catering to our student athletes. So now we have a great relationship, and it's a working relationship, and our sports psychologist does not take the place of CAPS, and that was very clear. And so we're very lucky. We have great campus support, and I think we made a great hire in who we hired, in Dr. Andrew Wallanen, and he does sport performance psychology as well as addresses clinical mental health issues as a clinical psychologist.
Yeah, he's also done a ton of research and writing on anxiety and depression in athletes, and so to have an academic person with an academic background in that position here at an institution of higher education is really cool too. And one of the things I've been thinking about as we've been talking, Ty, is that I think Eric kind of referenced this when you asked what attracted him to St. Joe's. But so St. Joseph's just in the fall opened its first ever School of Health Studies and Education. And so again, having a person like Eric in this leadership role has gone like miles into helping athletics integrate into that. So he's already teaching a course in kinesiology to the undergraduate population this semester. We're already talking about ways that we can integrate, what those students need in the new school, our clinical hours. How can we help? Shadowing opportunities. How can we create win-wins for the academy? So, and that's one of my huge goals is, how can we use athletics to support the bigger university goals? And so I think Eric being able to jump right in, spend a ton of time with that brand new dean and educate her into or educate each other on some of the possible synergies has been a really cool thing too.
Yeah, it sounds like it's definitely beneficial. I'll ask a couple more questions here and then we'll wrap. The first one is specifically to the position, Jill, for you. When you hired Eric, seeing as this is a new position, did you know how the position would be evaluated? Or do you ask somebody like Eric who has been in this type of position before, how do you evaluate this in terms of, are we successful at what we plan to do with this position? I guess that's kind of to both of you guys. How do you evaluate this type of role?
Yeah, that's a great line of questioning, Ty. I think, a couple things I'll say. One, it was brand new and I'm not the expert. So Eric actually came up with the title and then helped me kind of rework the actual position description after he started in terms of really getting our arms around what this would entail. And that's going to continue to be fluid. A lot of times position descriptions are drafted and they go into an archive and you can never find them. I actually pulled his up the other day and was like, oh, what are some things that we talked about doing and haven't done, which was really none, but what are some of the things he's doing that we didn't even anticipate? So I'd say along with that, I think it's a great question. And I think the metrics, people often talk about the metrics and evaluation of creatives is sometimes a little bit different now that everyone has their own content producers. And I think the metrics and evaluation of a high performance person's a little bit different too. There are some metrics that are pretty objective. We're trying to control our medical spending. And so, Eric and I together have a new insurance broker. We have a new third-party administrator. We're getting great data. We're making decisions that will hopefully save us money. Sparta Science is one that can hopefully help us with some injury reduction. So, that's one example of a metric. And increased use of mental health services. Eric kind of mentioned that. We knew there was a need. So we've got those metrics. And as I see it, as we go out and Eric and his staff educate, we'll have even more use and we'll end up needing a second person to bring on. So those are some of the things that come to mind. But that's something we probably will spend a little more time on is talking about exactly what success looks like.
I would say from myself and from my seat, how I measure success, and this has been really a question I've gotten since I started in this role a while back, but it's hard to measure success in this seat, to be candid. And I think it's multifold. First, all the factors that Jill spoke about in student athlete injury prevention and cost reduction and data. But I also think, a true leader in this area is about personnel development and personnel management and alignment of goals for the high performance team and keeping the line of sight on a daily basis to those folks that work in this area. And Jill mentioned, kind of the title. And I said, this should be a senior associate AD for a high performance because I expect the folks in this area to perform at a high level every single day for our student athletes' experience, and so our sports can perform on the field. And so measuring success involves, I think, leadership skills, I think development of personnel, I think efficient student athlete healthcare, data-driven decision-making, and injury prevention at the end of the day. Like I don't operate in a reactive role in a healthcare position, right? So, as Jill said, that stuff we'll talk about and after an evaluation of a year. But the one thing that Jill and I have been aligned with, and you said, what attracted us to each other, I guess, was just that. And how do we continue to get better and have this like innate instinct and fire to just be great every single day at what we do? And that trickles down throughout the athletics department in general.
I was just going to say, like when our lacrosse team moves into the national rankings, like they did this week, that's a high five all around because, that's what we're striving. We're striving to be nationally relevant. And when that stuff happens, that's kudos to the coaching staff, the student athletes, Eric's team. So that's a really important metric too, is are we helping the student athletes reach their potential on and off the field? So it's been a really cool partnership and I can't wait to see what we do in the future.
I imagine it is. I'll ask this last question to you, Eric. You mentioned leadership is a part of what you do. Is there an aspect of ensuring that the various staff and coaches that work under your umbrella have either do research or have opportunities for personal and professional development as a staff, in addition to what they do for student athletes?
Yeah, absolutely. And you said those folks that work for me under my umbrella. I always say we work with each other.
Right. Okay.
And part of professional growth and development is getting involved in research and is getting involved in campus collaborations, and how do I empower them to be a part of that and grow and learn and develop. And we all know in college athletics, every day is stressful. And the great thing about it is every day is a new day. But I think the one important part in leading folks in this area, because it's a very stressful area to be a part of, because at any moment, an emergency can occur. So it's hard to put your head on the pillow at night sometimes. But I always kind of reset my team and I say, listen, at the end of the day, we work in what I call the toy department of life. So athletics is an outlet for many people to reduce stress, and they pay to come to games, and they love to watch sports and invest in sports. But we get to work in it. And so sometimes it's not pushing to how much more we can do, quote unquote, but it's where can we pull back to reset us to say we really are really lucky to work in this area, this profession, and this institution. And so I am sensitive to workload, but I am not so sensitive where we're not going to branch out into other areas of healthcare or partnering to do research or partnering to make the institution better as a whole.
Right. Well, Jill and Eric, this sounds like an excellent partnership. Eric, specifically in terms of the growth of this type of position in the industry, you've been leading the way for a long time, and I think it's really appreciated within the college athletics industry. And of course, Jill, to hire Eric and bring somebody on to help grow the services you provide for student athletes is an excellent thing, and what this whole industry is all about. I really appreciate you guys joining us here on One Question.
Hey, thanks for having us, Ty, and letting us tell our story. I'm just sitting here thinking there's so much more we could have shared, but that's for part 2. So we'll tease our listeners, and hopefully we'll get back together someday.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Ty. And like Jill said, part 2 is going to be fun.
Oh, yeah, we'll talk about the growth of it, right? Well, I appreciate you guys. That was Jill Bodensteiner. She's the Director of Athletics at St. Joseph's University, and Dr. Eric Laudano. He is the Senior Associate Athletics Director for High Performance, also there at St. Joseph's University. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.